Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm back with a little bit different of a video. We're going to be talking about some tips and tricks. So I'm going to be focusing on products from the newest release from By the Will for God. This is Contending for the Faith. I do have an unboxing of this video. I'll link down below. Now at the filming of this particular video, it's Friday, April 29th. It's the last day of the pre-sale for this kit. I'm hoping to get this video up today. I can't guarantee it. So if it's after the 29th of April, it's no longer available for pre-sale, but it is available for purchase. During the pre-sale, it just gives you access to some discounted pricing on the extra stamp sets and a discounted price on the kit, but then everything gets stocked into the shop for full price after the pre-sale. So you don't want to miss this one. I will link the unboxing down below if you want to see everything in the release. So what I've done in the past, not always, but with some unboxing videos, especially if there's products in there that I think, I have some special ideas for, I'll try to insert those into the unboxing video. And then my unboxing video ends up being like an hour, hour and a half long. So I decided to pull that out, do a separate video. That way it's a little bit easier for you guys to reference to. Also, a lot of times when I'm doing the unboxings, I mention some ideas for the product, and then I want to do them in a tutorial video, but then I never get that tutorial video up. Process videos take a little bit longer for me to do, and so I wanted to be able to show you the ideas I have floating. I'll probably use these in future pages and things like that, and then that way I can just refer you back to this video to see how those techniques are done. So with this release, there were lots of fun things. We're going to be doing some simpler techniques into some more complicated, still not very complicated, but a little bit more in-depth process here. So we're going to be looking at the Jude Alpha. This is the new Alpha that released with this. It's got an uppercase and a lowercase. It's a 6x8 stamp set. Really, really great one to mix and match. Has some extra flourishes. So I want to just kind of quickly show you some ways to use that. Then we have the Running Clocks background stamp. You can use it, just very simply with inks, but I wanted to show you a quick and easy background technique with that. We've got Gears for the Called. I use this ticket. Now, this technique that I'm showing with this stamp set, you could do with any stamp set. We're going to be doing some like custom metallic watercolors, stamping with distress oxide inks, kind of showing you a couple things with that one, but I happen to use the stamp here. And then Wings of Majesty, that is this butterfly, and I had some really fun ideas for getting that metallic look, but also giving you some dimension. So for this video, I'll be using that other winged image from this stamp set. I've already gone ahead and kind of prepped that for the video. And then here is one of the two stencils from the release. This is the butterfly, and I wanted to show you kind of a fun little tip in with that. And so these kind of just give you a base idea of how to use these things, and then you can kind of run with it. But I wanted to just kind of, instead of the regular, maybe same old way that you're using things, I wanted to kind of show you some specialized ways. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with probably the most simple one, which is the Jude Alpha stamp. Now I am going to go ahead and put timestamps down below for you guys if you want to jump to a particular technique. When you come back to this video, it will be a little bit easier for you guys, so check out the description box. There will be timestamps. But for this first one, Jude Alpha, very, very simple, but I just wanted to kind of show you just visually some different ways that you can use this stamp set. So this stamp set has a lot of flourishes. You'll notice that the uppercase, a lot of the flourishes to the left side of the letter. So one thing I ran into is I started to stamp this out. Now I did mix the uppercase and lowercase, and that's what I wanted to show you as well. It's a great way to utilize the stamp set, but the H, if I had stamped it the way it is, would run into my letters. And I'm like, well, that's not gonna work. For me, that may be totally fine for you, but it wasn't working for me. So I just flipped the H upside down. Now, I know that's not going to work for every single letter, but just to kind of give you an idea to adapt as you're going along. You could also bounce these letters. That means, stamping one a little higher than the other and then stamping the next one a little bit higher, so you kind of have up and down. That would also allow some room for those flourishes. But there gives you a look of mixing, the uppercase with the lowercase, gives you really pretty fun look. Those would be great for titles. And then there are several little flourish pieces in here. So I just wanted to show you, it does not have to be perfectly centered. It can be kind of off-centered, and it just really gives that really kind of vintage feel to a title. And then for the word hope, I just use the H the proper way. So you can see it does look slightly different. If you didn't know any better, I don't know that you would, right off the bat recognize that that's upside down. But here it is uppercase H and then the lowercase of the other letters, and then just using that little flourish to kind of add some decorative elements. I did try attaching the flourish, you know, as an added flourish out this way. However, this little piece here is basically this top F part. So I don't know how to explain that simply other than to show you, but the flourish, if I was to do it like this, doesn't quite line up right. It actually goes like that. And so it's going to overlap over that. So my initial idea was to use that as a little add-on. Now you could use it an add-on, go in the other direction. But you know, I just wanted to point that out before you start going to stamping thinking that's gonna work, and then it's not going to quite work that way. I think that flourish is going to be better used as just kind of an add-on floating around to just kind of fill out your word, and you can see how fun that is. So again, very, very simple, but just wanted to show you, you know, just an example of some ways to use this particular stamp set other than just, you know, stamping them out. So there is the Jude Alpha. Let's move right on to this one here. We'll start getting a little bit messy. This is the Running Clocks stamp set. Now this is meant to be a background stamp. Now when you see this in black, you're kind of like, whoa, that's very dark. I don't know about that. So I love that they include an example on the back. So this example is stamped in browns. Now you very easily could take your ink pads and kind of ink up different areas of the stamp set and just stamp it down in its entirety, but that's not typically how I use these background stamps. So I, of course, use inks, but I wanted to show you, you can stamp with distress spray stains. Now, just keep in mind, the spray stains and oxide sprays will most likely bleed through your Bible pages. So if that bothers you, then you may want to page prep. Just keep in mind, it takes an extra long time for these to dry if you've prepped your page with gesso. If you're wanting to do this technique and you're kind of concerned about bleed through, I would probably do it on a separate piece. So like on this cardstock, and then turn this cardstock into a pocket or, you know, an embellishment piece or a layering element, something like that. If you're really afraid of bleed through, but you still want to try this and use these, bleed through doesn't bother me. I just see it as a bonus. I just stamp it down. And when I come back to the other side of that page, typically I work in my interleave Bible with these. The bleed through just becomes the background for the next page. So I don't really fuss about it. But you may be using this for other projects, journaling cards or scrapbooking, things like that. So I wanted to show you. Now I kind of lucked out. I walked over to my rack of inks and just kind of started pulling inks that I thought would match. And this actually ended up matching the colors of the kit pretty spot on. So I will be doing another video where I show the different colors and things that I'm pulling together. If you want to see, you know, the crayons and inks and other products I'm pulling together, I will link that down below once it's gone live. And these will be included in there. But I'm just using tea dye and frayed burlap gave me all these colors. So just 2 colors and 2 different types of sprays. We have oxide and the traditional gave all this color. So let me show you how I did this. Now, I like to use a non-stick craft mat. They come in all different, they have all different ones. They have this one that goes to the media, big glass media mat. You can buy these individually, or they have the brown ones. This one's actually cut in half, so it doesn't really make a difference. You just want a non-stick sheet, and that's gonna make the ink kind of bead up and is easier to grab a hold of. So I'm working on a non-stick. This one does have like a grip on the back, so it grips to your surface. Now this does makes a mess if you're not careful. So you wanna make sure that you have your oxide inks shaken. And then when you shake these, you wanna shake them like this, not like this. You can see I'm getting a lot, I don't know what it is about this particular ink of mine, this frayed burlap. It's like the stopper or the pump is kind of stuck, and so it leaks a lot of ink out everywhere. So these are messy. You may want to wear gloves, but okay, so I'm going to start. I like to start by spraying my regular spray stains. Now these are just a dye-based ink. And so they're more translucent. The color is very, very rich and intense. And so this is what's going to give you the depth to whatever you're working on. So that's frayed burlap and tea dye. And then I like to come back in with my oxide sprays. Oxide sprays react with water, and that's where you get all of these fun kind of velvety texture changes and color changes. Frayed burlap especially is going to bring in a little bit of green rustiness, which is really good. So I'm going to add just a smidge of that on there. Like I said, my spray for some reason is really wants to act weird. Okay, tea dye. This one has really pretty like peachy pink tones to it. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that in there. And then I am gonna, you can see all my overspray, I am gonna add a little bit of water to this. And I'm going to just kind of lightly mist a couple sprays because I really wanna get it beading up. Now we have got quite the mess here. So you may want to work, on a protected surface in a splat box if this really bothers you. I am going to do this on another, I'm just putting something underneath to protect my desk. I've got a piece of cardstock, but that could be your Bible page. That could be really anything here. And then I am going to leave the stamp on the plastic backer. So I've gone ahead and removed this. And then I'm gonna use this as my stamping block. If you want to stamp this in its entirety, I would recommend getting a large stamp block to mount it on. But when I'm doing backgrounds, I like just bits and pieces. So I'm just going to dab that right into the ink. And then we're just gonna get to stamping. Now I'm gonna hold this for just a second, and that's gonna let the ink kind of soak into the paper. That's gonna give you a more crisp image. It still is gonna be very loose and very messy, but if you let it kind of sit for a second, you're gonna get that reaction there. So, or you're gonna get it more better. You're gonna get a better impression. And then I'm just gonna go and stamp bits and pieces of this around my whatever I'm doing, and you'll see this gives you lots of different tones and things in the stamping. Now if you want more of that oxidized look, you're just going to use a little bit more water. The oxide sprays again react with water, and the more and more water, the more and more of reaction you get up to a certain point. So and then depending on where you pick up the ink on your mat, you're going to get different colors. Now you can see I picked that up immediately and I got kind of a puddle there. So that just kind of gives you an idea of a way to use those background stamps, and not get just a full image. This is giving you a very abstract look there with lots and lots of color. And you can do this with any colors. You could do pastels and you could do jewel tones. It does not have to be grungy brown. That's just what I'm using for the sake of, this kit and what matches with it. But that's gonna give you kind of a fun background. So let me clean up my mess and we'll move on to the next technique. All right, the next simplest one is using the butterfly stencil. Now, don't forget this stencil can be used in either direction. I'm gonna put it on here for you guys to see. So you can use it in this direction or flip it over and use it in this direction. You could kind of double it up. You can see I can kind of layer it over and then create a full butterfly. So if you were doing, a full, page. I don't know that there's any Bible. I guess this would be your illustrating Bible, probably would fit an entire butterfly on there if you wanted to. But I wanted to do a fun tip in. So what I did is I just ran some texture paste through the stencil. It takes a little bit to dry. I've done this technique in some other videos. If you have questions about texture paste, I'm gonna link Tim Holt's video down below. His most recent video, they re-released a lot of the texture paste, and he really goes in depth about the different texture paste, grit paste, crackle paste, all the different pastes, ways to use them, whether they take color, don't take color. I mean, there's all kinds of information. So I will link that video down below for you guys. But I just use regular texture paste. You could do this with anything. You could color, you could, blend inks. It doesn't necessarily have to be texture paste. But there was a Bible page that I did years and years ago. I couldn't find it in my Bible. I kind of did a quick look and couldn't find it, but years ago I did a page where I had a butterfly kind of popping out of the center of my Bible. And so I wanted to show you that you could do that with a stencil. So what I did was I just put some texture paste through the stencil onto some pattern paper. It can be vellum, it can be just plain paper, cardstock, and it doesn't really make a difference. Now I did try it on acetate and it did not work with the texture paste. The texture paste wouldn't stick to the acetate, but I think this would work with vellum. But I just used texture paste through the stencil on some of the pattern papers from the release. And then I just fussy cut out around the butterfly. So I didn't pick up all these extra little gears. Fussy cut, I did leave myself a little bit of an edge. You can see it's about what the edge is here on the stencil. That just gives me a little bit more room to use double-sided adhesive. So I would use a very, very thin double-sided tape. You could use liquid glue. I just, for this particular technique, I like to use just a really thin double-sided adhesive. So I will link that one down below. You would put adhesive on the back of the butterfly, and then you would just stick this right into the margin of your, or to the gutter of your Bible, and then you would have this little pop-up butterfly piece. And obviously you could flip the stencil over, do a second piece, and then you would have a full butterfly if you wanted to. The nice thing about doing it on the pattern paper is that when I flip this over, you know, it's still pretty on the back. I could, you know, gesso this, or depending on the paper I use, I could write, you know, my notes. This one's a little bit harder to write on because it's busy, but you could write your notes on the back of there, maybe do some scripture writing on the back of there if you wanted to. So especially if you're working in a Bible that doesn't have that full blank page like the Interleave Bible, this would be a fun interactive kind of tip in without being a traditional, you know, rectangle or square or something like that. It just kind of gives you this fun little pop up in your Bible. Now you could also adhere it, you know, to the side, and, you know, if you added a crease to that, then you could do a pop up on the side like that if you wanted to, but I was thinking more in the gutter. Now you could go super wild with your texture paste. You can ink this, you can paint, you know, add paint to it and color. It does not just have to be plain white. It doesn't even have to be texture paste. This is just, was giving you an idea for you to jump off and kind of do your thing with. So there was just a creative way. You know, typically we see stencils and they're just flat on the page, right? We just blend ink, or I'll put a video, a Tip Tuesday down below that talks about stencils and different products you can use through stencils. But typically it's just, you know, onto the background of the page. And so this is the way to kind of pull it off and make it 3D, which I thought was kind of fun. So super, super simple. There is the butterfly stencil. And as you can see, I did go kind of wild. This was my first test piece. This was using the spray stains, and I used some distressed crayons kind of inked in there. And you can see that the texture paste does kind of repel the ink a little bit. So I came back over here with a baby wipe and was able to lighten up the texture paste, and that kind of gave you that resist there. So you can see, you can go grungy, you can go simple, if you want to play with the texture paste with that. So there is that one there. Let's move on to this piece. So there's a couple different things going on this one. I wanted to show you how to make your own metallic watercolors. Now I love the Gonzai Tombi Starry watercolors. That's these ones here. So these starry colors, I do believe they have a palette that's colors as well. This one you can see has a variety of different golds. It has just a white gold. And this one is great. I love the Kuretake watercolors, but I thought that this technique that I'm going to show you is a little more cost effective, because the perfect pearls you can do a lot of techniques with. You can make pearlized watercolors, but you can also do other techniques with them that you can't necessarily do with the watercolors. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. But if you've seen some of my videos with the perfect pearls, you've bought them, and now you're kind of wondering what else you can do with them, this is one of those things that you can do. So first we are going to stamp out an image. Now I'm going to again use the gears for the called here, and I'm going to show you a little mini technique within this as we set it up. So I am going to use a stamp positioning tool, if I can find mine. Okay, just for the sake of making stamping a little bit easier, I am going to be stamping with Distress Oxide. And so sometimes Distress inks don't stamp perfectly the first time. So I'm going to use a stamp positioning tool. This would be a great way to create your own little ephemera pieces. So stamping on a separate piece of cardstock, coloring it in, and then fussy cutting it out. So I'm just going to pick that up. If you've got a new stamp, especially if you're going to be stamping with distress inks or distress oxides, I like to go over it with an eraser. That's just going to take any of the like oils or, you know, film off the top of the stamp from when it was produced, and that makes the inks adhere a little bit easier. So for this example, I'm using Distress Oxide in Frayed Burlap. I love oxide inks. They're a little tricky to use in your Bible because they do have a tendency to bleed through if you're stamping with them. And so I know a lot of people have bought these and are like, okay, but what can I do with it? You know, how can I stamp with these? Now, the tricky part about these inks is that, and the fun part about them is that they react with water. But that also means that if you stamp with this, you couldn't necessarily watercolor with it, right? Because it's going to, I'm going to prep this with the powder tool. It's going to run. It's not going to stay crisp and clean when you stamp and then watercolor, if that makes sense. So let me go ahead and stamp. I can't stamp and talk at the same time, apparently. I'll link this pressure tool down below for you guys. This was sent to me, and I do forget to mention it because I just reach for it and use it. So I will link that down below for you guys. It makes it really nice when using the stamp positioning tool. So I'm gonna stamp this also with Versamark. You don't have to do this. I'm doing it just to be safe. The Distress Oxide inks don't dry right away. They do take a minute to dry. So you can emboss on these, no problem. You can just add your embossing powder over the top and emboss it like you would with any other embossing ink. But for this technique, I wanna make sure that that ink is sealed into underneath my embossing. So I am gonna add a layer of Versamark over the top of it just to make sure it's good and coated and sticky and wet when I go to the next step. So I've got it on my positioning tool, which means I can just stamp it right back down. And then we're gonna add some clear embossing powder. And that clear embossing powder is what's gonna make it so that we can watercolor with the distress inks. Because if I was to add water to that, all that ink would run. It's not a permanent ink. So I'm just using some clear embossing powder. I'm gonna add that over the top. And then we will heat set this. Okay, so now you may not be able to see it on camera. The ink is actually trapped underneath the embossing. So it does have texture, but that also makes it easier to watercolor with. And now that colored ink is trapped. So if you have been investing in these inks and you don't want to be investing in a separate set of inks that are waterproof, that is a way that you can use these and make them, so they won't react, and then you can watercolor with them. So now let's talk about metallic watercolors. So these are the watercolors that come with the devotional kit. They do have Aztec Gold, which is this one here, right there. That's the Aztec Gold. So it does have some iridescence and shimmer to it already, but the other colors on the card do not. So what I've done is this is the original from the card, and then this one I've added little perfect pearls to, and so it changes it into a metallic. Same thing with this one. This is the original. This has some perfect pearls added to it, and you should be able to see the light catch the shimmer. This is the original. This one has a little bit of perfect pearl added to it. So you can take any watercolor and turn it into a shimmery, iridescent, metallic watercolor. So what I do for that, I do have this 4 set. I think it comes actually in like a two different 2-packs. So I have pewter, I have sunflower sparkle, the original perfect pearl, and then perfect bronze. Now you can do all of this with just the original perfect pearl. However, perfect pearl is gonna give you that opal type shimmer. I did not necessarily want that for this kind of gunmetal gray color. It would really shift the color of the watercolor. And so that's where I'm gonna go ahead and use something like pewter that's a little bit closer to that watercolor color, and that's gonna just add a more subtle kind of shimmer that isn't as obvious. So you can kind of play around with what you like. That's kind of what I did. Now I'm going to kind of show you how I do this. So I'm gonna spray that so it starts to get wet. So let's go ahead and make this grayish one here. So I'm gonna pick up a little bit of this Payne's Blue Gray, and I'm gonna add this to a separate palette. So this is just a porcelain tray that I picked up. Really, it could be anything. So there is that. And I wanna show you, actually, that's not the same color I used, but that's okay. This purpley gray color is actually that Bloodstone Genuine, I believe. So here's that Payne's Gray without any perfect pearls in it. And then now I'm gonna add a little perfect pearl. So this stuff is very, very fine and dusty. I'm just gonna use the end of my paintbrush. There's no scientific ratio for what I put in there. I just plop a little in there. The more of this that you use, the more opaque that the watercolor will be because of the nature of that shimmer. You can't see the lid through that shimmer powder. So the more of it you use, the more opaque your watercolor will be. So we're just gonna kind of mix this together. Now it does change the color just ever so slightly, but not too much. Love the granulation that's in those Daniel Smith watercolors. Okay, so then as that dries, you'll be able to see the shimmer. So now I can take these shimmer watercolors and I can paint in this stamped image. And again, because we sealed in the distress ink, it's not gonna bleed out when it gets wet. And so that kind of allows me to use all the same inks as I'm working through the kit. I'm not having to jump between, let's say, Versamagic inks, chalk inks, or something like that. If I'm using the Distress spray stains and I'm using Distress paints, now I can use my Distress inks and watercolor an image in with them, and it's all nice and sealed underneath that embossing. So let me dry this really quick so you can really see the shimmer in that watercolor. Okay, so now you should be able to see that there is a definite shimmer to that color. It is slightly, you're losing some of the sedimentation that you get. Sedimentation is just that texture that you see happening with that one. It does change a little bit of the property of the watercolor, but it's a very cost-effective way to get a set of metallic watercolors without having to buy a whole new set of watercolors. And it's gonna make your watercolor cards stretch even further. And so then you can see how that is colored in and really kind of gives you a fun ephemera piece to use in your journaling. So let me go ahead, clean this mess up, and then we will go on to the last piece here. All right, so this last technique is using this Wings of Majesty stamp set. And as soon as I saw these wings, I instantly wanted texture and dimension. Now, you can't always put dimension in a journaling Bible, and so when I close the Bible, this will definitely be flattened. So this may not work. I mean, it will still add a little bit of oomph to it, especially if you put some foam adhesive underneath there. But this is going to be more if you're doing like a tag ring or memory decks cards, something like that that isn't going to be sitting, in a closed Bible and you just want some fun dimension. But I'm also going to show you how to use the perfect pearls to color this in as well. So I've already gone ahead and stamped out that image. Now I did also heat emboss this with some clear embossing powder. Whenever I'm watercoloring a stamped image, I like to emboss it because that creates kind of, I don't know if you remember those velvet marker sheets that you could like color in with marker, and it was velvet so that you couldn't color outside of the lines, right? Like you couldn't see it through the black velvet. That's kind of the same idea with embossing. So when I've embossed the image, so it does have some texture to it, it creates like little walls so the watercolor doesn't just run everywhere. For me, I'm very impatient, so I want to jump between colors, I want to jump between areas, and I can do that when it's embossed. So I've already gone ahead and stamped this with some VersaFine ink. This is a pigment ink that stays sticky and wet a little bit longer, and then just added some clear embossing powder and heat embossed it. I will put a Tip Tuesday down below if you have questions about heat embossing. That's not what I'm showing necessarily in this video. So This piece was painted in with some Perfect Pearls and then shaped. So I'm using the Sizzix shaping kit. This has been on the market for a really, really long time. And then Tim Holtz re-released it in kind of this packaging and the coloring and this specific set of tools. And this was one of those things that I saw I really wanted to use. And now I've just got to remind myself to use it. It's great for flowers, but also great for things like this. So it comes with 2 styluses that have 2 different sizes on each end of the stylus, and then it has some nice pointy tweezers for holding on to projects or for doing like paper quilling for, you know, if you're doing the rolled flowers and things like that, it's got those. But then it also has this little foam piece in here, and this is what you're actually going to shape, what allows you to kind of, you know, have a surface to shape that into. So that is what I'm going to use to shape it. But first, we got to color it in. So again, I'm going to pull out my little tray here, and then I'm just going to plop out some Perfect Pearls. Now, I'm just using the Perfect Pearls as is, the colors that I have here. You could, again, make your little custom watercolors and watercolor it with those as well. You do not have to just use colors straight from the Perfect Pearls, but they do have Perfect Pearls in a variety of colors. So if you really wanted to go crazy with Perfect Pearls, you definitely could do that. Now, I'm not going to paint the whole thing in for the sake of the video. I'm just going to kind of show you what I'm doing. So I've got my powder out on there. I am going to add just a little bit of water to this. Now, Perfect Pearls need water to bind to your paper. So if you just dust it over sticky ink, I've shown that technique before, you do still have to spray it to seal it with water. But because we're watercoloring with it, it's already sealed in there. So the water has activated the binder. And you just kind of have to play with the ratio. The more water, less powder, the more translucent it's going to be. The more powder, less water, the more intense and opaque it's going to be. So I'm just going to kind of quickly color over this. You're going to see those lines kind of repel this, and that's again because it is heat embossed. Typically I would go in here not nearly as messy as this is, but just for you guys, we'll just do this quick. One thing to note when you are working with anything metallic, whether that's metallic watercolors, if you're working with your Perfect Pearls, don't forget about your water glasses. You'll see I'm working in 2 separate water glasses. This is my dirty glass, this is my clean glass. So when I've got stuff on my brush, when I've got, you know, paint or Perfect Pearls or whatever it is on my brush is dirty, it's gonna go into the dirty water first. And then I'm gonna go into the clean water just to make sure it's extra, extra clean. But there's metallic pigment in here now. So if you're gonna move on to a different project and use paint and you don't want it metallic, switch out your water, because you may notice that you have metallic in your project, and that's because of your water. Those little metallic flecks are floating around in there, and you can pick it back up on your brush, and that's going to then transfer to whatever you're working on. So just keep that in mind. If you don't want that happening, you need to be intentional about emptying your water. So I know that that's not pretty, that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and dry this and fussy cut this out, and then I'll show you how we shape it. Okay, so I really, really roughly cut that out. You can see I didn't all the way color it in, but you can see all that metallic shine. This one, obviously, I used like all of the colors on and went pretty thick with the Perfect Pearls. Now, your shaping needs to be the very last step. So let's say you wanted to ink this with some distress inks on the edges to really kind of grunge it up. You want to do that before you shape it. If you're wanting to add, you know, anything to it, do all of that, and then the shaping is your very last step. I found that to be the easiest. So to shape it, you're going to pull out your mat here, your little foamy mat, and you're actually going to flip it upside down. So we're gonna work on the back side of it, and you are gonna wanna kind of mist the paper. I'm gonna spray, I'm working with the really heavy stock from Ranger, but typically you only need 1 or 2 sprays, and that's just going to kind of help you break down the fibers of the paper, and that's what you're doing when you're shaping it. So you want to go biggest to smallest in whatever size that you decide, and so you can kind of fuss and figure out what works for you. And I like to pull towards the center of the image. So I do like a line to the center, and then I'm gonna move to a smaller piece. I'm actually gonna go to this smaller one here. And I'm gonna then pull to that center line, kind of like the veining in a leaf, right? So I'm drawing a line and then I'm drawing little, veins into that center line. That is what I'm doing on the paper. And you can go over this several times. You're just breaking down the fibers and kind of beginning to shape that wing there. And this is gonna, depending on what you're working on, whether it's flowers or leaves, is gonna kind of change how you do this, the direction that you go, the strokes that you make, how much that you want. But that's really gonna begin giving you that shape. So now you can see it no longer lays flat on the table. It's starting to take some shape, and you can really go, crazy. If I go and use the bigger one and really push hard in there, I can get even more shape to it and really get it to pop up. And then if I want it to, so that is what I started with this one. So this one was kind of like that. Then you can go in and make little creases at the base of the wings, and that's gonna help it kind of look more like wings, if that makes sense. So you're just gonna kind of manipulate it, but now you've got that fun texture. Don't worry about anything on your mat. I just use a baby wipe, kind of wipe that off, let it dry, you're good to go. And so you can see you could go and even kind of shape the heart if you wanted to and make it hollow. I'm just kind of going in a circular motion here. Now my paper is a little extra wet for that, but that's gonna kind of give some shape to that centerpiece if you want to. And so you can, like I said, go crazy with how much shaping that you do, and that's gonna add some texture. But I just love how that really makes it pop up. It's not just the flat stamp. Let me find the original stamp, here we go. So it's not just gonna be that flat 2D stamp. Now we've got some dimension to it. Now, if you do put this in your Bible, it will maintain a little bit of that shape, especially again, like I said, if you add some foam adhesive. Let me grab some foam adhesive underneath it, like under the wings. That is something like these. They have pop dots and squares, things like that. So if you were to put those underneath the wings, then that would help it kind of maintain its shape on your page and keep it popped up. But they would also be great for the front of a project, for tags, memory decks, that kind of thing. So there is that technique showing both how to use perfect pearls to watercolor and also add some shaping. So there we go. There is some tips and tricks for this release. I hope that kind of gives you some fun ideas. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below. Check out the description box for links to everything that I mentioned today, including those additional videos. Give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.